first speaker for the day is Mr. Ken Black. Ken is an independent advisor for inclusive physical activity and disability sport. He's also the founding director of the Inclusion Club. He is a trustee of the board for Limb Power, and he has also created a video production, I believe, called Adapted Physical Activity. And Ken has worked as a practitioner in the area of inclusive physical activity and disability sport for over 40 years. This has included work in special education, disability sport, sport development, youth sport, and disability sport. Ken, very, very excited to hear what you have to share with us today. So over to you.
Thanks very much. I'll get to my screen and we can start. There we go. Let me get rid of everything else. Okay, hello everyone, and let me just see if I can get my okay. I think if you take yourself off the screen, Ancilla, then that's probably okay. I think that's us. Okay, welcome everyone, and I'm really pleased to have been invited to speak on this Sport for Social Change Network webinar, specifically looking at disability inclusion. My background, you've already heard from Ancilla. I'm not going to go back over it again. And I'll maybe say a little bit about the Inclusion Club right at the end. But what I wanted to think about was sport for inclusive development in its sport for inclusive development, and particularly look at some of the projects in which I've been involved. I've been very lucky to work around the world in lots of different projects, working with local people to develop sport programs for disabled children and adults. And I want to mention one or two of those in this short presentation. But I want to start off with, although I really would see myself as a practitioner and really dealing with the practical issues around how you adapt sport for different abilities, I wanted to focus initially on some general issues around funding and use that as a sort of springboard to look at some other things. Then looking at some examples from different projects in which I've been involved. And then finally, a quick word about inclusion frameworks and adaptation tools. So I wanted to start with some issues around funding. And a lot of people will be familiar with sports development pyramid, where you have elite sport at the top, you've got the kind of progression in the middle, foundation and participation at the bottom. But what we find in sport for development and sport for inclusive development is you've got this gap in the middle between the support for elite and competitive sport and the support for grassroots foundation participation activity. And so it's this area in the middle that somehow we need to solve the issue of how we bring sports federations and people who are providing funding closer to the grassroots, where community sport and participation activity is taking place. I just wanted to give you a couple of examples. If we look at the Pan-American Games, if we look particularly at funding for elite sport, Canada spent 1.4 billion on supporting the Pan-American Games in Toronto in 2015. 1.4 billion Canadian dollars. The Brazilian team, the investment in sending a team from Brazil to these games, 2016, was 16.2 million US dollars. And that's worked out at over $100,000 per gold medal that they won. So it's a huge investment in a small number of athletes. So an example I could give you is that the UK sport current funding aimed at about 1,300 athletes is £543 million. That's the kind of money that is being spent on elite sport in developed countries. So the anomaly is, and this one I'm going to look particularly at Paralympic sport. If we look at grassroots investment provided by Sport England, for example, in England, then these are some of the funds that are available through Sport England for sport and physical activity for disabled people at the grassroots level, so at foundation level. And this totals £36.7 million. But if we look at the investment in Paralympic sport, it's 72.7 million. So it's double really what the investment is being made in grassroots development. And that equates to 72.7 million to help 300 to 400 athletes prepare and potentially attend Paralympic sport, the Paralympic Games on behalf of Great Britain. But 36.7 million is there for the 9.4 million disabled people who live in England. So there's a huge disparity between the amount of investment that goes into elite sport and the amount of investment that goes into sport at the grassroots level. And so community sport, and whether it's in a developed country like the UK, or I mentioned Canada, Brazil, or a developing or emerging economies, this disparity is one of the main issues. So what we need to do is, it's not only a funding gap, we need to find and solve the gap in provision between grassroots development and that performance in elite sport. All the sports science and all the effort that goes into producing an Olympic team, and the Olympics are currently underway, and the Paralympics not long afterwards. All that funding that goes into supporting a relatively small number of athletes. It's suggested that as few as 10 to 15% of all disabled people in a developed country, because of the classification system, because of opportunity, maybe only 10 or 15% of all disabled people could ever get to the Paralympic Games because of age, of the opportunity they might have. The classification groups, which mean a lot of disabled people don't qualify, only about 10 or 15% of the disabled population could ever get to the Paralympics. I'm more interested in the 85% who are at grassroots level, who just want to be physically active. And that's really what I'm trying to focus on in this short presentation. So this is a quote from a woman called Alison Seabrook, and she's the CEO of Community Development Foundation in the UK. We want to fill the gaps. Government departmental provision in sport, what it doesn't tackle is the people who aren't sporty, who aren't active. So a lot of money going into the sporty, the elite athletes, people who are wanting to participate in competitive activity, but far, far less going into community sport. So these are the figures that are illustrating this. So we look again at the sports development pyramid. It's this gap between support, funding, concentration on sport at the highest level, and somehow connecting that with the foundation and participation level, connecting sports federations with people on the ground. And what I've found in disability sport is that sports federations can generally work fairly well with people who are already doing the sport. So people who have competency at a particular sport, even if they have an impairment of some description, a sports federation kind of can deal with them because they're dealing with somebody who's already doing their sport. What they have real problems with is reaching down to grassroots level and providing support for and developing sport at a community level. Now, there are funding opportunities at that basic level. The Agitos Foundation is a foundation set up by the International Paralympic Committee, and it's open to the member countries of the Paralympic network. But you can see, if you think back to the figures I showed you earlier, just for single countries, you know, Great Britain putting in 70 million into Paralympic sport, 650,000 euros made available to 28 IPC member countries for community programs. And it's great that they're doing this, but it's still a tiny amount of money compared with what goes into top level sport. But the Agitos Foundation, if you go on the Paralympic their website, you can find out more information about how to access these funds. There's another another example is Sport for Africa. This is one of their programs is Seeds for Sport. And some of you in this webinar may have heard of this or be even utilizing it. Basically, it's a kind of loan scheme that helps to start up businesses. The businesses don't have to be sport orientated, but the agreement is that in order to support a small business, part of a proportion of their profits, once they have got into a profit making situation, those profits go into community sport. So it's a way of supporting small business in a developing country and also support community sport in a parallel way. So it's quite a clever scheme. And there are many other schemes that support sport at community level, but the degree of funding is varied, and it doesn't have the huge support that governments put into elite sport funding. So if we look at development strategies and inclusive physical activity in sport, and over the years, I've been very lucky to work in many countries. I think I've worked on development projects with local people in 55 different countries. So I've been lucky to work all over the world with, and mostly in developing and emerging economies. And these are just a few things that I've, I guess, learned from the colleagues I've worked with over the years in these countries. Infrastructure development is very important. If disabled people can't get around in a society, it's hard for them to get to the opportunities. And that includes transport, that includes access to facilities. So infrastructure development can be really important, but it's very costly. There are very simple solutions to infrastructure development, and it's working with people to address these. I think when you show that governments and local governments don't have to spend huge amounts of money in order to improve infrastructure, then we can begin to see some progress. Trainer training and the wider dissemination of information is really important. That is making sure that you've got people on the ground who can continue to spread and develop an adapted physical activity network at community level, which can draw people in, provide an opportunity for people to participate. And I'll say quickly something about that shortly. Establish awareness levels in the community to say that disabled people are part of every community and that we should be aware of them and their needs, and also the contributions that they can make towards society. They're not just there to take and use and use up resources. They can make huge contributions to society. Principles of inclusion, that's just giving people, if you like, sharing with people the mechanisms whereby inclusive practice can take place. And then practical application in the community. You can create training, you can create principles that people adopt, but it has to be able to be put into practice on the ground. And then a bottom-up approach in terms of grassroots development, I have always felt what's best. So you're not trying to start at an elite level with a sports federation and somehow get them to reach down to community level. You create a bottom-up approach by having people who are physically active at a grassroots level, and then sports federations become interested in what's going on, and perhaps they can recruit people from these community projects. And again, I'll say something quickly about that. Just want to give you 4 quick examples from different parts of the world: Peru, Malaysia, Ethiopia, and Papua New Guinea. Again, we're looking at this gap, the gap between the elite and foundation and participation. And I was fortunate to work with the Sports Federation in Peru. They actually didn't exist when I was first going there and we were setting up training programs. But the creation of working in partnership with it was through the British Embassy, the Peru Sports Federation, and an organization from the UK called the Youth Sport Trust, we were able to make a connection between the grassroots, creating a network at grassroots level, and the Peru Institute of Sport. And this led to the creation of the first ever community, if you like, disability sport organization that spread throughout Peru. There was a Paralympic organization, but there was no sports federation for disabled people operating at community level. So it was one of the key things initially was to create a network of practitioners, and that those people could then go to different parts back to where they lived in Peru and disseminate the information on adapted physical activity and create an adapted physical activity network. And then they began to generate their own courses. These are all in Spanish language. They began to generate their own training courses at local level that people could attend, and they could draw in sports coaches from sports federations, teachers to improve the quality of physical education. And the sports federation became a platform whereby this training could take place. I also want to mention a project. I was lucky to work over a long period of time in Bahir Dar in Ethiopia, northwest Ethiopia, and this project was through UK Sport, and it was part of the London 2012 Legacy, and an organisation in Ethiopia called the Cheshire Foundation. And basically, the idea was to try and recruit a coordinator team. A lot of these young people were PE students who couldn't get a job in the community in schools, so they started working on this project as a community coordinator. And basically we ran a whole series of training with these young people who then worked in kebelas or communities to develop sports opportunities for disabled people. And an important thing was consistency. They ran sessions every day, twice a day, and they were consistent in that in each of the 9 kebelas in Bahir Dar. That meant that disabled and non-disabled people would come together to do physical activity and sport, and they knew that these young people would be there at the once in the morning and once in the late afternoon every day. And so people would know that it was a regular happening and that they could attend and become active. We also used the expertise within the Cheshire group and then wider to develop equipment. So rather than try to bring in expensive equipment into the country, and it's very difficult to purchase even simple things like volleyball nets. We were able to work with local people to find cheap ways of manufacturing the equipment. And then we also developed resource material that that teachers and sports coaches could use in order to make their sessions more inclusive. Okay, almost there now. This is a final one in Malaysia. Not quite a final one. It's this is the importance of teacher training. And so this was a project I was involved with, again, through the British Council and Youth Sport Trust. And this was working with a teacher training college in order to train student teachers in how to be inclusive. So this is physical education teachers and working with them to improve their inclusivity in their teaching. And I worked initially with the staff at the Teacher Training Institute so that they could then implement inclusion into all of their programs, and that program is still running. Finally, I just wanted to mention this project in Papua New Guinea. There was a project that I was working on through when I was working for the Australian Sports Commission, and we developed a project called Pacific Sports Ability, and we started in Papua New Guinea. And I just wanted to mention that this project took place. Again, it involved training, working with sports teachers and coaches. But the thing I wanted to mention was this can lead to people reaching the elite level. So this was a grassroots program. But a guy called Francis Campion became the first ever medal winner for Papua New Guinea at Olympics or Paralympics. He won the 100-meter silver in Beijing, and he was discovered through the Ability Sports program, which was the Papua New Guinea version of Pacific Sports Ability. So that you can, the point about having people at grassroots level is it can generate and lead to people moving through to the higher level of physical activity and sport. So this is a quote from a colleague I was at a conference with in 2016. If we want more gymnasts at the top, we need more people doing gymnastics at the base. And I think that's the message I'm trying to get across. Very quick mention of frameworks and adaptation tools before I finish. And this is just to say that part of the training is about equipping people with very simple ideas and tools that they can apply to any physical activity. And this is one called the STEP adaptation tool, which I've used all around the world, and we've adapted into different languages. And it's just 4 parts of any activity that you can change in order to make an activity more inclusive. And I think it would be good if down the track we can share more of these practical ideas with other people, and I'd be interested to hear later in the question and answer if that's something that people would like to see. So more regular input, if you like, on the practical solutions to how do you include disabled people in football or in volleyball or in basketball, for example. So just to conclude, the most important resource available to disabled people in sport, in my opinion, I think of a lot of other people's opinion, are human resources. It's equipment's great, money's great, and all the rest, but we have to have people. And so that's why the training and the empowering of people at community level is such an important factor in leading to disability inclusion. So I hope that's been of use, and I'm going to pass on now to Jasmine. Next, going to tell you how a sports federation can actually operate successfully at a community level. And then later, Susan, who is going to talk about the biggest sports program for disabled people in the world, the Special Olympics program. So I'm looking forward to both of those. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Ken. It was really, really informative. I have like a million questions that I want to ask you. So yeah, I'm really excited about the Q&A session. But let us move on to our next speaker. It really gives me great pleasure to introduce you to Jasmine Morris. Jasmine is a football development officer focusing on disability and women and girls at the North Riding Football Academy. And Jasmine has worked before within communities and schools which cater for children with mental health difficulties and special education needs. She also has a range of sporting qualification, in addition to a sport development degree, along with 10 years of experience in coaching sport to children with additional needs and within a mainstream setting. Jasmine, wonderful to have you with us today. Can't wait to hear what you have to share.
Thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. There we go. Can everyone see that? So I'll be talking to you today about how to create an actually inclusive session. So all of the general principles of how to establish goals and the planning and organisation of coaching sessions are equally applicable when coaching players with disabilities, but there just might be some extra things that you need to consider. So what do you actually need to know? So it's much more important to understand the barriers to prevent disabled people from taking part in sport. I'm just going to move you guys. So I'll be talking about some of the barriers a bit later on, but at the meantime, obviously do your research and don't be afraid to keep learning and asking questions. So equipment. There are some factors that should be considered, such as if you're indoors, like the wall colours, using contrasting colours such as blue for the benefit of players with partial sight. So bib colours are also key, so using bright colours, they're just better for everyone to distinguish the two teams. And also something as such as wearing a bib can also present some challenges for players. So don't assume that a player knows why they have to wear a bib. So explain what it actually represents or the challenges, challenge them to come up with a team name in relation to the bib colour. Another thing to bear in mind is also cones. Cones can be quite confusing. They confuse me if there's a grid over there with loads of multiple colours. Make sure you try and use one colour for a grid, for example, so you can say go over to that green grid over there. Next would be kind of engagement. So you have your equipment and your location. How do you actually get your participants? So successful engagement needs to actually involve disabled people, families and carers, and they'll provide you with better knowledge with what's needed in your community. Where's your session based? The venue should also appeal to the players, somewhere that they can feel safe and comfortable and also enjoy their activities. And also the terminology, so think carefully about the terminology which you're using to advertise your session. Although disabled people is a widely used phrase, some groups and individuals don't actually identify with the term disabled people and they don't consider themselves disabled. So to reach more people, choose the wording carefully in your promotions. So next thing would be additional safety checks. Are any of those necessary? The need for individual goals might be a bit more important. How to adapt the way you deliver and organise a session to accommodate everybody. Similar to what Ken was saying earlier about the step approach, I'll be going over a different approach, but also it incorporates the step approach there as well. But for example, you can use different communication techniques or using the tell, show, question and listen technique. So you tell them the activity that you're going to be doing, you then show them with a demonstration, you question the individuals to say, oh, what do you do when you get to this cone? And then you listen and say, oh, can you repeat the session back to me? Just to ensure that everybody understands and you're not singling one person out. So don't assume that everyone understands what you ask them to do just by telling them. People learn in a variety of different ways. And don't be afraid to ask them questions as well. And also the length and intensity and frequency of sessions, as well as the drills of activities within each session. So for example, some players with disabilities tire more quickly, others may need regular rests, and some may have difficulty regulating temperature, so they might need to rehydrate more. But these are all questions you can ask your participants once they turn up to your session. And also, it's important that the participants in the session know that they can go at their own pace. If they know that they can take a break whenever they feel like it without a fuss, and the coach won't single them out, they won't be put under any inappropriate stress. And you'll likely find that disabled people are respectful to different the needs of different people, and the focus of the session should remain flexible to accommodate different abilities. And then lastly on this slide, the structure and sequencing of sessions, you may need to adapt drills and warm-ups, and you may need to be more creative in finding ways to explain certain skills and activities, adapt the drills and warm-ups to accommodate the needs of the athletes, and also modify equipment and adapt rules to maximize opportunities for participation. So moving on, as I mentioned briefly, the barriers to participation. Something that we found when we were researching in this area is that there's three main things that contribute to barriers to participation, and it's plays one of the biggest roles in preventing participation as well. So psychological. So research shows that in order to appeal to the people that you want to appeal to, do not focus on the disability. Instead, try and link it to their values to highlight enjoyment and the positives of being in a team environment, making friends. So coaches who are passionate about the sport are key for the creation and sustainability of that session. You've got social barriers as well. So research shows that a negative first experience can actually put the participants off from coming back. Ensure that your session is fun and welcoming, everyone's got a smile on their face. Encourage friends to come along to the session as well, and obviously they've got a buddy there as well, so it makes them feel more comfortable. And then also physical. So is your location accessible? Is it a safe space? So moving on to something that we use in football specifically, I can't say that word. So the inclusion spectrum is an activity-centered approach to the inclusion and individuals of different abilities in a sports program. In the past, people were considered to be disabled according to their medical condition. Their particular impairment was seen as preventing them from accessing sport opportunities. But in more recent years, a more positive approach is to consider the opportunities, and we can design and adapt accordingly. They'll be far more accessible for people, irrespective of their impairment that they may have. This model is also known as the social model. So it clearly identifies the barriers to participation by people with a disability are not due to the individual's actual medical condition, but they are caused by either attitudinal, economic, and environmental factors. But in a sporting context, inclusion can be achieved by changing the environment of the way that activity is presented and delivered. So the inclusion spectrum consists of four approaches to the delivery of the drill or practice. So it's arranged in a continuum of participation, and each approach aims to empower coaches and teachers to encourage involvement of players with a disability. The four strategies, although they're quite different, they all overlap in ways with each other, so they can all be used in practice. So what are the four approaches? So you've got open games. So open games are where everyone in the group is able to participate with either minimal or no adaptation or modification. So an example of this is warm-up games, integrated games, individual skill development, where you set them a specific task based on their ability, and then also cool downs. I think it's always nice to have warm-ups and cool downs where you've got the whole group together and really including everyone in that space. So an example of this, I'm just providing more football examples, sorry. So this game's called Change. So each player has a ball. When the coach shouts change, players leave their ball and collect another. You don't really need to change, everyone goes at their own pace, and there's no really modifications needed there for everyone to be involved in that activity. So the next one would be modified games. So modified games occur when changes are made to the game or activity in order to promote inclusion. So for example, you can alter the space, as Ken stated earlier, as part of the STEP model. For the more advanced players, you can make that space smaller, and then for the lower ability, you can make that space bigger. You've then also got parallel games. So parallel games are for when everyone plays the same game or has the same game theme, but they're all organised in ability groups, and the activity is set at a level appropriate to each group. So, for example, you've got separate the group into three. You've got one group passing a football around the circle, the second group passing a football with a defender in the middle, and then the third group passing and moving whilst in an area with a defender, so they're moving about as well. So that would be a higher ability in comparison to group one, which would be a lower ability. But in the parallel games, it's also important to know that you're grouping based on ability, not their disability. And then also you've got disability specific as well. So this is an impairment specific groups, either for safety reasons, for example, blind players, they wouldn't play in a disability session just for safety reasons, or part of a competitive structure. So I've just got another example here, so real life example, and then how would you split it out into the four approaches that I've just mentioned. So you've got Robin Hood here. You can create 4 stations with a group of players at each station and place the balls in the middle. On the word go, everyone goes, runs into the middle, grabs a ball, goes back to their start place. When there's no balls left in the middle, they all go around and steal each other's balls for a certain amount of time, and then whoever's got the most balls at the end wins. So how would you actually adapt that into the 4 different approaches? So for the modified approach, you can have the players collecting the ball by whatever means. Again, this is a football example, but you can get them to pick the ball up. Wheelchair users can also be on top of the cones, and they could just go at their own pace. There's no real race. The parallel activities. So again, make sure that you are adapting it accordingly to their ability, not their disability. But one group, you can have walking and picking up the balls. The next one would be as the original game. And then the third one would be with a defender guarding the ball. Obviously, you can see the stages of development within this as well. And then obviously you've got disability specific, and if you have wheelchair users, they generally use larger footballs. And then lastly is just another example where you've got a traffic light. So each player has a ball, and they're running around a grid with a ball at their feet. When the coach shows a red cone, they all must stop with the ball on the foot. To progress the game, the coach would then introduce a yellow cone, and they all must change direction or anything that you wish that yellow cone to represent. And then the second progression would be introducing the green cone, and then this example here is where they increase their speed. So firstly, you've got modified activities. So you reduce the space to assist them with limited mobility. Use different types of balls. So you've got grip balls, bigger balls, and then smaller ones as well, just to help with the different ability levels. And then also you can stop the ball with your hands rather than using your foot. In parallel activities, you can use your hands to stop the ball again. Group 1 could only be working with one cone rather than having multiple cones. Another one could have red and yellow cones, and another adaptation could be players just walk with the ball rather than actually running. And you can see there in the parallel activities that they all have the same game theme, and they're all pretty much doing the same task, but it's just adapted according to their ability. And then lastly, you've got the disability specific ones. So for blind players, the coach can shout the colours so that they all have that understanding and they all know what cone is being shown. Or they also use balls with little rattles inside so they can see hear where the ball is. Right, and that is it from me.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. There was some incredibly exciting practical examples. I'm definitely going to be reaching out to you to get more information specifically around the football skills. So be prepared to get a call from me. Just for everybody on the call, just if you look in the chat group, They have shared a resource that Jasmine has authored. It's a disability engagement toolkit. And please make sure that you copy and paste that so you have that resource available after this webinar. Moving on now, it gives me really great pleasure to introduce a friend and a colleague, Ms. Susan Masila. Susan is with Special Olympics in the Africa region. Susan has been involved with Special Olympics for over 13 years now. She started as a volunteer for Special Olympics Kenya and eventually became the National Director for Special Olympics Kenya in 2016. In 2020, she joined the region staff for the Africa region as the Manager for Global Development and Government Relations. And she's now the focal person as well for safeguarding in the region. Susan has also received a number of awards and recognitions. She received the Women Add Value Recognition Award, which was awarded by I Change Nations. She also received the Champion Leadership Award from I Change Nations. And recently, last year, she was given a Head of State commendation in Kenya. And she's also an alumni of the American with Disabilities Inclusive Education Fellowship, as well as Israel's Agency for International Development and Cooperation. Welcome, Susan. I'm very excited to hear what you have to share with us today.
Thank you, Ansela. I'm trying to share my screen.
We can see it, Susan.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll take a few minutes in my session because I have the privilege to be accompanied by one of our athletes. So I don't want to take much in this session so that I can give him enough time. And in my session, I'll be just sharing with the participants and introducing to the participants to Special Olympics. And just to mention, Special Olympics is an international sports organization for persons with intellectual disabilities. Now, I think it's important for me to clarify that we primarily focus on persons with intellectual disabilities, and we are not, we don't work under the Paralympics Committee globally and also in countries and national committees. One thing I want to mention about intellectual disabilities is that intellectual disabilities continue to be one of the least understood type of disability, and also in many instances it could be invisible, and this makes it one of the disabilities is actually left behind even within disability inclusion realm itself. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area. Then let me now go back to Special Olympics, and I want to share that I know Ken said that Special Olympics is the biggest disability sports disability organization in the world. It's very true, and because we are a leading global organization for sports for persons with intellectual disabilities, we do also have a very ambitious vision that in the near future we are going to have an inclusive world for all, where people with intellectual disabilities will live active, dignified, and very productive lives. So our day-to-day work continues to lead us to this very ambitious vision, which we are very sure we can achieve. Let me go to our approach. Though Special Olympics is global, the most focus of the work is in the grassroots. And I was happy when Ken mentioned that if you want to have many athletes at the top there participating at the global level, then we need to have many of them in the grassroots. And that's where our work is focused. And when we talk about the grassroots, we are also looking at, first of all, creating opportunities for persons with intellectual disabilities to participate in sports. and through sports to be able to participate and access other rights such as health and education. And in grassroots, we focus in strengthening our programs such that communities, families, and the ecosystem at that level is able to come on board and support those with intellectual disabilities. Now, as much as we are looking at strengthening the grassroots, we all know that sustainable change cannot come if we don't engage the policymakers. So our other approach is to, through our programs and projects, to engage with government to ensure that we have policy frameworks that support inclusion. And with such policy frameworks, as Ken also mentioned in his presentation, is that that creates an opportunity for governments to fund and mobilize resources that support inclusion for people with intellectual disabilities. And we have a very simple way of doing this, implementing this approach of grassroots and system change. And I'll give an example of a project we are implementing in Africa called it's a global project, but it's also happening in Africa, called Unified Champion Schools Project. In this program, we work with the students in schools, those with and without intellectual disabilities, who come together through sports, through youth engagement activities, and therefore we are able to remove some of the social barriers to inclusion. Jasmine has just mentioned some of the barriers include attitudes and social norms. So when we bring the people without disability into a space where they can play with those with intellectual disabilities, then some of these social barriers we're able to remove them at that level. But also, as we engage the young people themselves, we're also working with the teachers, the educators, so that the educators can also go ahead and start at removing some of the barriers to inclusive education, and also to enable to reinforce facilitators that make it possible to deliver an inclusive education for persons with and without intellectual disabilities. And then there is now where we engage with the ministries of education, and through our work, we are able to influence actually policies. I'll give an example in Kenya where we've worked with the ministry. Special Olympics Kenya was a part of a group that just developed the first physical education policy for basic education in Kenya. And because of the participation of Special Olympics, that policy has an inclusive outlook in all areas. So at this point, inclusion in sports and PE is not addressed as a standalone, but it's addressed within the entire policy. Then the other approach of our work is targeting populations without intellectual disabilities. There's a saying that goes around, I don't know whether we've come across that, we've spent many years teaching people with disabilities how to live with people without disabilities, but very small attention is given to persons without disabilities. So we are focusing on those without disabilities so that they can also understand the peers with disabilities. And we do this through models like our unified sports model, which is a model that allows people with and without intellectual disabilities to train, compete, and or participate in a recreational way. I was glad when Jasmine was sharing, because I could see how through our unified sports model, we've been able to integrate, to use some of the strategies she has shared to ensure that persons with intellectual disabilities gain meaningful participation together with their peers without. So what Jasmine was shared is not something theory. I think in Special Olympics, we've seen it work. Then the other focus is looking at removing barriers to inclusion. And there are so many barriers, and I won't go back because Ken and Jasmine did summarize some of these barriers in their presentations. But what I want to mention here is, and especially now with COVID, we've seen how the world has really changed, and things we used to think were normal, they are no longer normal, is use of technology to reach out to more people with intellectual disabilities, to open up programs and ensure that there's increased participation for people with intellectual disabilities. And even in places like where we are in Africa, where we are still considered as technologically somehow behind, we are still trying to use creative and innovative ways of ensuring that we can leverage on technology to remove barriers to inclusion. Now, that's our approach. And just to summarize my presentation, is just to mention that when I started, I said Special Olympics is global. We are in 7 regions in the world, and here in Africa, we are in 38 programs, and I'm happy to have Ansela on board, who is one of our program leaders. And just before I conclude my presentation, let me also acknowledge that in the attendee panel, we have our President and Managing Director, Mr. Charles Nyambe, who is listening in, and we are honored that he joined us in this presentation.
Thank you so much for that, Susan. And, you know, obviously Special Olympics is my passion project. So definitely would love to get some more input from you as well. There's a couple of questions that I've jotted down. Very, very, very excited to see that another friend and colleague and someone that I admire greatly has joined us, is able. Thank you, Nyasha. I didn't see you there for a second, so I was worried we'd lost you. It's an absolute honor to introduce you all to Nyasha. Nyasha is a Special Olympics leader, but so much more than that. He's both an athlete and a leader in Special Olympics. He's an athlete from Special Olympics Zimbabwe. He is the chairperson of the Global Athlete Congress. He is also a board member of Special Olympics International, and he is a Special Olympics Sergeant Shriver International Global Messenger. Nyasha is also a very sought after speaker globally, and he's spoken on many, many platforms on different continents in different countries. But just to mention that he was invited to speak at the United Nations at the 12th session of the Conference of States Parties to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in New York. Very impressive track record of speaking. But outside of that, he's a very accomplished short and long distance runner in Zimbabwe, and he holds an impressive record of 17 gold medals, 6 silver medals, and 1 bronze medal. He also competed at the 2015 Special Olympics World Games in Los Angeles, where he won a bronze medal. Nyasha, it is so good to see you. I'm really, really happy to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you so much, Ansela Smith. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to attend this Global Inclusion Week. First and foremost, I would like to acknowledge the presence of the Managing Director, President and Managing Director for the Africa region, Mr. Charles Nyambe. We are doing so well in the Africa region, and the team behind the Africa region staff members who are doing so well, extremely well, and the programs, national directors who are doing so at local programming, so that you see we are shining at a regional level, not just at a regional level, but at a global level, because of their sincere hard work. To see athletes like me, people with intellectual disability, being recognized and being given such a continuous opportunity to grow, not just in sports, but in leadership, and also in presenting in different platforms. I'm a perfect example of how Special Olympics is doing to people with intellectual disability. If you keep track record of where I've come from and where I am, you can see there's so much huge difference, even in terms of presentation. I was not able, confidence like as I am now. It's through Special Olympics. It does not just offer sport, but it offers sport and leadership. We have got a mantra in Special Olympics which says nothing is for us without us. So Special Olympics has got a perfect model of including athletes in all its programming. We have got a athlete leadership, which goes into unified leadership, where we teach about how to create inclusive communities at a grassroots, which also spread out to the communities. We've got also like the health. We've got three pillars that we offer in Special Olympics. We've got sports, we've got health, we've got education. So in health, we have got athletes as health messengers advocating for teaching health habits every day to my fellow athletes. And also education and awareness, where we teach about unified leadership, how leaders without intellectual disability can work with leaders with intellectual disability. That's creating unified leadership. And this program has helped athletes like me to grow so well. And also we have got sport. We offer sport as a catalyst to spread inclusion, and we don't in Special Olympics, how unique we are. We offer all competition at all ability levels. We don't just focus on elite athletes. That's create inclusiveness, because no one is left behind. And I just want to thank the region and also for creating this platform to share the amazing work that Special Olympics doing in other programs, that other organizations that are in partnership with this to promote inclusion to people with disabilities like me. At the end of the day, we are creating an inclusive world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nyasha. As always, you really, really are a shining example of what athletes with an intellectual disability can achieve if they are given the opportunity. I'm going to open up now for some questions and answers. I'm going to ask if all the panelists can put on their cameras so that we can see everybody, and then just prepare yourself for questions. For those of you that would like to ask your questions that haven't typed them into the chat box, please can you raise your hand? If you go down to the bottom of your screen, there's a raise hand button that you can click on, and then we'll know that you would like to ask a question. We do have one question so far from Frankston Mushindu. And Frankston is asking, what is the role of parents and guardians at community level to have a sustainable disability? Oh, and that just disappeared. Frankston, would you like to just to have a sustainable disability sports program? So what is the role of parents and guardians at community level to have a sustainable disability sports program? So I'm going to actually open that up. I know what we do as Special Olympics. So Jasmine, if I could turn that over to you immediately, just from your side, if you could maybe want to give some input there in terms of your football academy. How do parents get involved and support?
Yeah, definitely. So we have found that if the parents initially buy into whatever it is that you're advertising, your engagement levels are actually going to be a lot higher. So the parents are often there to support the young person or support the adult with the disability. So if they enjoy your session, they believe in the values of the session, and it believes that it's going to be a welcoming environment, you're more likely to get that engagement from the participants, because the parents at the end of the day and the guardians are the ones that are going to be supporting them young people. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to jump in with that.
Thanks, Jasmine. I think, Ken, if you wanted to jump in from your side, and then I'll move over to Susan.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree with Jasmine that the involvement and the inclusion of parents is vital, really, because they are often, interestingly, some people mention barriers, both Jasmine and Susan mentioned barriers. Parents can sometimes be a barrier to participation because they resist. They're trying to protect perhaps the young person, and sometimes they feel that you know, that certain activities and sports might not be for them. But the two ways that I've applied it over the years is to try and involve parents and carers in training. So if they want to be part of the training, to encourage that, so that they join in, they understand the approach that we're taking and the kind of activities that we can offer. But also, most of the workshops and the training programs that I've been involved with, we've always tried to include inclusive sports days, where the young people and the people who've been doing the training can show what they've learned. And it's important to invite the parents to those activities, because when they, sometimes for the first time, they see a young person performing activities that they thought they could never do, and it opens their eyes. They see that, yeah, this person actually, that their son or daughter can achieve things, and then it begins to. So yeah, I think it's real important that parents are actively encouraged to be part of the program.
Thank you. And I'm going to move over to Susan for some inputs there on how parents get involved in various roles in Special Olympics.
Thank you, Ansela. Let me just start by saying that in Special Olympics, parents are a great stakeholder. Actually, they are among our largest group of stakeholders beside the athletes and the volunteers. Now, just to pick up from the train of thought from Jasmine and Ken, we engage parents through initiatives like the Family Support Network. And through these networks, Special Olympics parents are able to reach out to other parents and, you know, share the good news, let me say that, or the message of hope, or even create advocacy. And that helps a lot in getting the buy-in from the parents. We are now engaging them from parents who have children, I think from 2 years, and so that because we want to show them even at that young age, your child is capable of doing something in sports and in play, and this has contributed a lot in support of the long-term engagement of the athlete. And then, Ansela, allow me also to mention that in our health program, as Nyasha mentioned, we work with parents to educate on preventive and healthy ways of supporting the athletes through what we call the family health forums. And now, actually, in family engagement, we are moving now to the siblings, including the siblings in life and of this athlete on and off the field, so that the siblings now can become our forefront change makers alongside the athletes. Thanks, Ansela.
Thank you, Susan. And Nyasha, from your side, as an athlete with a disability, what does it mean for you? Or what do you see as a critical role that parents should be playing to help create sports programs on a grassroots level? Nyasha, you're muted.
Thank you, Ansela. Can you come again?
Yes, sure, Nyasha. I just wanted to find out from your perspective as an athlete, how important is it that do you think for parents to be involved and to support their family member with a disability, and how can we get them involved inclusively in the sporting programs?
Thank you, Ansela Smith, for the question. It's critical because parents and parents, guardians who live with a child with disability, they play a pivotal role in the upbringing of the child. So their involvement is key to the development of that child. For example, if a child lives with hostility, he or she learns to fight. If a child lives with love, caring, he resembles that to the outside world. But if a child lives with neglect, reject, and isolation, I tell you, that child will never see anything good in himself or even you know, the greatest disability is in the mind, not in the physical that we see. So I think there's a lot of encouragement needs to be done to those parents, siblings, guardians who live with the children with the, disabilities. Because I also faced that in my growing up, to such an extent that I was told I was useless, I'm good for nothing. And that is created lots of barriers to me. But now through Special Olympics, I've learned a lot in such a way that I never knew I'll be a person I am today. So I think there's need for an awareness, education and awareness to the communities, to the parents, to the guardians, so that at the end of the day, it starts from that community. That's because whenever you go outside world there, it will be easier because it's coming from parents, it's coming from guardians, it's coming from closer relatives. I think that's what I've seen, that what I've perceived in my journey as an athlete and as a person with intellectual disability.
Thank you so much for that insight, Nyasha. I mean, I think that really begs the question, specifically in Africa. There's often so much stigma around children with a disability. And oftentimes those children are hidden away and kept at home. And what role, and I'm going to open this up to Ken and Jasmine and Susan as well, do you think community-based sports organizations could play in overcoming that stigma that still very much exists in Africa? Ken, over to you.
Okay, I'll go. I think what similar to what I was saying earlier, I think it's if you can show that young people can achieve, but you think, well, how do we get them in the first place? One of the strategies that I've used in different parts of the world is, instead of focusing an inclusive sports program on only the disabled people in the community, we tended to make it targeted at all young people in the community. That way you're trying to attract. So for instance, the one I mentioned earlier in the Kebelis in Bahir Dar, Ethiopia, those sports sessions that happened twice a day, every day, those were aimed at all young people in the community. But by inviting everyone, we wanted the disabled young people to come also. So that, and we found that was the case. Once they saw that what was happening was something that they could do, then they came and joined in. But it's difficult if the parents actually are the barrier, as I think, as Nyasha said, that they can often be, they're the gatekeepers for young people to get into physical activity. And if they're positive about that, then the young person can progress. If they're negative about it, then you have to try and overcome that negativity. And I think partly it's from showing young people, showing the parents, carers, guardians, that the young people can achieve things, that there's things they can do, and they're not just helpless victims.
Thank you, Ken. I mean, I think that's just hit the nail on the head. I think getting the parents involved, again, we're going back to the importance of having parents involved on every step of the way in our organization, in what we do in our sporting programs. It's helping to break down that stigma and make parents more aware of the child's ability as opposed to the disability. But I wanted to go over to Jasmine as well on this. And I mean, obviously you're in a European country, but do you face the same issues in terms of stigma around disability, you know, in what we would regard as a more advanced community?
Yeah, definitely. So across Eleanor and North Riding in particular, well, across the country really with football, we don't label the sports as disability football. So we generally say like ability counts or pan disability or something like that, or an inclusion. We don't label it as disability because we find that does actually turn people away. I know one of the football leagues that are run across the country, they're actually called ability counts leagues rather than disability, and that actually attracts more people than saying this is disability, because as I stated like previously, a lot of people don't actually identify with the term disability or disabled person. So as Ken said, if you target a community and include everybody, then you're kind of reducing that barrier, and it's the same as over here.
Thank you, Jasmine. And then I'm just going to go over to Susan. I mean, I know in Special Olympics that we obviously use the word athletes, very specifically steering away from the mention of disability, but certainly, the challenges that we face here are very real in terms of the stigma that is still very much attached to any form of disability in Africa. Susan, just some insight from your side in how you're tackling that situation on the ground.
Thank you, Ansela. I think the stigma, especially in the African region, comes from our cultural beliefs and myths, because traditionally there had to be a reason for everything. So there had to be a reason for having a child with disabilities. So I think one of the strategies, and Ken and Jasmine has highlighted, celebrate the young people, make their achievements known, make what they've done, make people know. For example, just Nyasha, what Nyasha said right now, I think what they believed about Nyasha is not the same thing, the same way they are looking at Nyasha in Zimbabwe right now. If Nyasha was not celebrated, maybe we would not have changed that perspective. So celebrate them. Then secondly, involve persons without disabilities in your programming in the community. And I'll give an example. In one of our programs in schools, we have an aspect where we include the whole school engagement. We call it whole school engagement, so that at least once in a while, the whole school has an opportunity to interact with a fellow student who has a disability. That way, the myths, the misunderstanding, the confusion is slowly tackled, and people are able to see that there is something else about this individual. And this means they stop seeing the disability and they start seeing the individual. I think that's what I would say, Ansi.
Thank you so much, Susan. I mean, I think there's another question that's come up, which very much leads into this, is that, Africa is a large continent, and this is the question. And while we have progressive policies on supporting people with disabilities, has there been comprehensive research done on the status of people living with disability on the continent? Looking at government, civil society, and the family environment, especially in very rural villages. Has there been any kind of comprehensive research done? And then if not, if we need that data, because that way that, organizations can be more strategic in our programming. I mean, I think from my side immediately to just say, I mean, from a South African perspective, we know we don't have that data specifically around intellectual disability. I think that data is far more developed in terms of physical disability, because obviously, as Susan mentioned earlier, you can see a physical disability, but you cannot see an intellectual disability. So I know for a fact in South Africa that we don't have the data on intellectual disability because it's not visible. And I'm going to hand that over to Susan. Susan, your thoughts just more broadly in Africa.
Thank you, Ansela. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, Susan, you just, there we go. Try that again.
Okay, now?
There we go. That's great.
Sorry, I'm using two gadgets, don't worry.
No
Ansela, I was smiling when you said that we don't have data in South Africa, and we consider South Africa not Africa enough. So imagine if you don't have data in South Africa. In a very serious note, what happens in the other regions? Data has been identified as one of the barriers to inclusion actually in the region, because we have limited data on disabilities and especially intellectual disabilities. And it cuts across in all sectors, not only in sports. But again, we see that we are seeing that also as an opportunity. And I'll speak on behalf of Special Olympics in our region, because we are also looking at aligning our programming with evaluation so that we can start producing evidence-based information on our programs and what we are doing. I think if all other organizations can take that approach, we can start slowly bridging that gap of lack of information and lack of data. Unfortunately, again, our governments don't invest so much in research normally. So what about in disabilities? So that's, I can say we don't have that. Data is a huge barrier right now.
Thank you, Susan. And I think just to that point, I know in South Africa, we probably have the biggest database as Special Olympics South Africa of people with intellectual disabilities. So I think we have done more research as an organization, and we have more data available than government organizations. So that's a really interesting question. And I think just going back to the question, sorry, Ken, it's just how do we use the data that we've got to Alan's question to actually plan more strategically. But over to you, Ken.
Well, I'm just going to say I think it's absolutely right that the more information you've got, especially from on the ground, it tells you what's happening. The more you can, the more intelligently you can react to that. But I would say that we can't always wait for research, and that's one of the things that's the issue. If there's a time lag or a gap between being able to have information and then implement it. The community sport programs are on the ground now. So sometimes you just have to look for practical solutions and go with it. Because if you just wait on research, that's not helping the organizations that are there now trying to work on the ground. So I think it's a parallel thing. You have to try and support and get more data as much as you can, but you've got to keep supporting what's happening on the ground at the same time. And I'd give an example. I did a lot of work with Special Olympics Bharat in India over a long period of time. And 10 years ago, the 2010, they had about 800,000 athletes and about 30,000 coaches, 36,000 coaches, I think. That was reaching right down to village level. But they were losing contact, if you like, with all those many athletes because the number of the coaches had only been trained once, and they were beginning to fall out of so that was something that needed to be dealt with. And although information would have been helpful, I think we had to just get on and try. And so we created a cascade training system that went down from national to state level and reached right down eventually to village level, and increased the number of coaches. This then had the effect of increasing the number of opportunities. They now have 1.6 million athletes in the space of the last 10 years, and they have about 80,000 coaches. So that immediately, that just looking at it on that sort of practical sort of solution that had to be taken. But yeah, I absolutely feel research is very important, but sometimes you have to support what's happening right here and now.
Which is pretty much what we do, Ken. We just go ahead. We can't wait for the data sometimes because a lot of this, especially our health work, is so critical for our athletes that we can't afford to be waiting until we get research done. Susan, you had your hand up. You wanted to.
Yes, Angela, I think Ken triggered some thoughts on the line of data. Now, as I mentioned, and Ken has mentioned, we cannot wait for research. We have to apply practical solutions. But what is happening, what I can say is, my observation is, there are so many of those practical models taking place in the African region, which are in different pockets, small pockets without harnessing this power, these very good models, and they end up just ending up at that level they don't proceed for something to be something else that can be sustainable. And this means, and then the other challenge with that is that though we have tested our own practical models that have not been harnessed, we still wait to export ideas that probably may not work in our context. While we've applied some of these ideas we've had our own contextual ideas that have worked, but since they've not been harnessed, nothing can be said about them. So we have to work with ideas that have been tested somewhere else, but we are not sure whether they will work in our own context. Thanks, Ancila.
Thank you, Susan. Yes, I mean, that's what we're doing on a daily basis, correct, is using best practices from other places and adapting them to our own programming and seeing if that will work. I mean, again, one of the reasons why I want to touch base with Jasmine is to pick her brain and get some of those great examples that she's used to see how we can use that in our own football programming. We have another question here, and it's quite interesting because I really want to almost flip the script on this question. The question is, what are the possible ways and advice for community-based sports organization to ensure that disabled participants reach the elite level regardless of the challenges they face with participants? Now, I'm going to just, as I said, flip the script on that question because I think it goes back to a lot of the input that Ken was giving about how the pyramid is skewed in terms of how much money is being spent on elite participation and how little is available for mass participation and development on the ground. And again, and this is my response to that question is, what is the incentive then for somebody whose disability means that they will never reach Olympic level, no matter how hard they try, because of their disability? So do we take the incentive away then from people who are not as high functioning by saying that any development we're doing is now reach, how do we reach Olympic level? And I think, just to that point, so that's an interesting discussion that I wanted to ask Ken is, do we not need to change that perception that achievement is only when you reach Olympic level? Because for some people, no matter how hard they try and no matter how hard they practice, they're never going to reach Olympic status because of their disability. So I just wanted to open that conversation to you, Ken, just based on that question.
Yeah, briefly then, I mean, from what I was saying earlier, and I think, yeah, that's a great question, actually. It's bridging the gap that I was talking about earlier. But first of all, it sounds like I'm hammering the Paralympics here. The Paralympics is a fantastic worldwide sports program for disabled people. And there's a lot of programs that are not the competitive sport programs, but supporting programs. I mentioned Agitos that are doing a lot of great work in many countries around the world. So it's not an anti-Paralympics thing. But as I said, and you've just said it now yourself, Ancila, that the vast majority of people will never get to the Paralympics. It's like I'm a non-disabled person. I wasn't ever going to get to the Olympics, and most of us will never be Olympians. And most disabled people will never be Paralympians. So we need to provide something that enables people to be physically active and to achieve and so it's providing those sort of stepping stones that allow people to move, perhaps go down sport-specific routes, or perhaps just being physically active, and it's providing the opportunities. It's lack of opportunity, I think, is the key thing. But yeah, some people will achieve, some people will get a huge amount of satisfaction about just being better than they did yesterday. If they go another little bit further on a walk than they did the day before, that's an achievement for them. And so I think it's providing the opportunities for people to maximize their potential to achieve what they can, which is good for them. And if somebody emerges from this grassroots, this groundswell, if you like, of activity, who can then move on. I mentioned Francis Compion in Papua New Guinea. He came out of a grassroots program. So, if that can happen, that's great. But I think we need to provide more support so that people at community level can be active.
Precisely, just getting people active and fit and participating and being social and inclusive. I just wanted to actually put that question over to Nyasha as well. As a Special Olympics athlete and as an athlete that has competed both locally and on a global level, Nyasha, how important is it for you, despite whatever ability level, to have an incentive to participate when you're an athlete?
Hello, hi, Ansela.
Hi,
Can you
Nyasha.
come? Great. Can you come again? Your question.
So Nyasha, the discussion that we're having right now is that, you know, some athletes, no matter how hard they practice and participate, will never be Olympic level athletes when we're talking about mainstream Olympics, such as Paralympics and obviously the International Olympics. So I'm just saying, how important is it as an athlete yourself that you have an incentive or something to work towards, but not necessarily the Olympics, knowing that sometimes you're just not going to be able to compete at that level?
Oh, thank you so much for the question. You know, it's critical, but sometimes I find solace and I found peace of mind in doing my sport. For example, running long distances, and it has given me that sense of being me. Like feel relieved from all those outside forces, such as being ridiculed, being criticized. You know, for example, if I just run like 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers a day, I feel relieved. I feel myself. I feel like, you know, you have rubbed off all those negative thoughts, negative ideas that people are putting on you. So like being an athlete, being a sports person, it's a great thing that, I used to remember when I used to run, people, you say, what running can bring to you. And, when you just do it, it becomes part of you. It's not just you are just running or you're just training to compete on the international level, but to improve yourself, to improve even other people who are next to you. You are just doing things that you love. You're just doing things that can keep you active at the end of the day. So it's not just like you want to compete at international level, you want to compete at a local level, or you are doing things to improve yourself, not to compete against somebody else. You're just doing things so that at the end of the day, you become you. I think that's my advice to other people, because some people, you just don't just do things because you want to get a reward at the end of the day. Do something that can have that sense of enjoyment, sense of peace, sense of life. You are just there, you are alive, you are full alive. Thank you.
Thank you, Nyasha. I think that was beautifully put. And right back to Ken's point about just the personal satisfaction, maybe the personal best of just being better than you were yesterday. And I think from our side, that's a massive incentive. We are running out of time. I've just noted, so I just wanted to open up to all the panelists to maybe just give their closing remarks on the session. There were a couple of great discussions that came out of here. I mean, I think, Ken, you gave such great insight on the funding model that we're looking at currently and what it's going to take to change that. Jasmine, such incredible practical examples of what we can be doing to create inclusion on the grassroots level. Susan, fantastic insights just in terms of what's been achieved by Special Olympics. And Nyasha, just such great insight from somebody who has a disability, who's managed to achieve so much through their sport. So I just want to give you each a minute just to give some closing comments on there. So can we start with Jasmine, if you could just want to give some closing comments.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you very much for having me. It was lovely, and thank you very much for your questions. And obviously, if you need any more practical advice, or you would like to pick my brains or anything like that, then please do get in touch.
Trust me, I will be there. Susan, any closing remarks from your side?
Yes, my closing remarks are very, very simple. Inclusion starts with the mindsets. If we start changing our mindsets, I think everything else will fall into place.
Wonderful, thank you. Ken?
Yeah, I thanks very much again to everyone who's been involved in this and inviting me to participate. I would say it would be great if we could continue a program, particularly looking at the practical aspects. I would see myself as a practitioner like Jasmine is, and it's great to see things like the inclusion spectrum, which I was lucky to work with some colleagues and develop many years ago, and the FA, the Football Association, is still using it 20 years later. That's fantastic. And you know, we need to try and share some of these practical tools that people can use on the ground. And I just hope that perhaps this is a springboard to more more seminars and more sharing of information. And the last thing I'd say is the people who are listening, the people who are listening have all got their experiences and incredible knowledge of what they're doing on the ground, and it would be great to find a way of sharing that more. You know, what they have participated. We've been lucky to be given a platform to talk about what we've been doing, but it'd be great to learn more about what some of the other participants. And a big shout out to Alison Burchell. I've met her many years ago, so hello, Alison.
Thank you, Ken. Nyasha, some closing remarks from your side.
I just thank you, Angela. Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, Susan, for the great insight. We have learned a lot through this inclusion forum. It was amazing. I learned a lot from this. Thank you so much. I just want to encourage you, motivate you that thank you for changing lives. You know, you're changing lives not only in your country, but all over the world. And I would hope and believe that through this we'll achieve an inclusive world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nyasha. Thank you for sharing. Just again, thank you to all the panelists today for the great insights. And I second your suggestion, Ken, that we continue this conversation so that the challenge is out there to the Sports for Social Change Network to see how they can facilitate that. I'm definitely keen to get involved on that. Again, a huge thank you to the Sports for Social Change Network for setting up this webinar and making this possible and bringing everybody together for this call today. And just to mention for those of you that are listening, that they have another webinar coming up on the 27th with the Alliance of Social Workers in Sport. And the topic there is going to be the art of listening to what my participants are telling me in our sports program. So I think that's going to be another very, very interesting webinar, and please look out for that and sign up for that. So again, thank you everybody for joining us today. It was a great, great, great conversation, and thanks again to all our panelists and to Sports for Social Change. Have a wonderful day further, everybody.